have unlimited, but I don't know if it'll start being slow on us.
Yeah.
That's a big deal, being able to have the unlimited,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, I don't know what's going to happen if we start school next fall and we don't get, and families don't get the unlimited anymore. That might be a huge issue.
Yes.
Yeah. Did you get my email that came out just not even an hour ago, Andy?
Yeah, I'm actually just reading it right now.
Okay, good. I'm just gonna pop it up here too, so or get access to it so we could look at it if need be.
So we need what, Kenny and Brent yet?
Yep.
Ken had joined and then he disappeared.
There he is.
That's Brent.
I think Kenny was on here too and disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like it's going to be a muggy one tomorrow.
Are you guys expected to get those bad storms then too?
I thought they'd be north of us, but
Okay.
last I heard, but guess we'll find out.
Yeah, we were really lucky on that last wave that they were projecting for us. And
Mhm. Mr. Bird, how you doing? You're on mute.
Is that better?
There you go.
Yeah, we got an email sent back to our board from our bus contractor late today.
oh yeah,
And he's quoting stuff from Wisconsin legislature and just different things. He sent some information. Basically saying we've got the money to pay, but we're not paying. We voted not to pay. He's got an opinion letter from R.C. Kelly Law Associates in Lansdale, Pennsylvania.
not the Seventh Circuit Court region, maybe a legal opinion that applies to Wisconsin. Huh?
Yeah, and he did not share with me when I asked him about business continuation insurance. So
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll have to see. But like I was saying, he thinks we have. He's not sure how the money goes, but he thinks we have the money, but we just are holding it back.
Yeah. Kenny, are you chairperson?
I believe I am. Do we want to call the meeting to order?
That sounds great.
All right, so I have roll call Esther Drury.
Here.
And then I believe it's, is it Andy is on this committee as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Here.
So Benish, all right.
Here.
Okay, so we have meeting notification.
So moved.
Second.
All right, we have so we'll move on to the first item of business.
And in case, oh, shoot. Well, I won't. I'm not shared as Brad didn't share me as the, a co-host, so I can't share my screen. There it goes. I got it.
Okay,
Okay. There we go. This is what I just sent out a little bit ago to everybody. Kind of take some of the thinking that we've been doing, and Bryce and Josh and I had a chance to visit about this a little bit this morning. But I had sent the request to Warco to get sort of an update on where they were at. And that was based on Eileen's suggestion that if we were going to have discussions, it would be good to get started. So after he sent back, I think we have three options. One, we could pay the bill as he outlined it for us, or you could pay nothing per the contract, or we could negotiate something, in between. So I think the issues that are still out there, one is just the responsibility that you have to be stewards of the tax dollars. You can't just give them money if the contract says you don't have to pay them. You need to get some value for that money. Now that could include helping him stay in business because you don't think you'll get another contractor available, but that's not necessarily what he's saying. But you have a responsibility to be good stewards of those dollars. So that's one issue. Another one is that maybe we will need some flexibility next year. For example, when we're looking at our bus routes, the drivers go pick up the country kids. Their last stop is in town to pick up the town kids, and then they come up to the school district. Well, if we have to limit the number of kids in the bus, we may say, could you pick up the country kids, come to school, drop them off, and then go back downtown and pick up the town kids and bring them up. We don't want to be paying for another route or a shortened route, or would like that all to be considered the same route. It just will take an extra 10 minutes probably to do that, or 5 minutes or 7 minutes or whatever. So we may want to have some conversation about some things that are for our benefit, but maybe not. But there also will be fewer, I misspelled that. There will be fewer funds available next year for accommodations. So if there are going to be extra costs, then we can pay them for them this year. That's better because we may have money right now that we won't have next year. So those are just some things we might not have flexibility about next year. Another one is the question that we get is, well, if you do this with a contract, what's the impact on other contractors? And we really don't have any that you have to be concerned about. We contract with the athletic trainer, but that's a fee we pay up front. So even though the athletic trainer didn't have a baseball and softball season this year, we paid for his services for the year. Food service contracts, we've been buying milk all along. So the milk is the only contract that we have, and in fact, we might have even gotten a little more because we're gone through all of June. And then the Upland Hills contract that we have for OT and PT, that contract says that they'll bill us as the service is provided. And we know that a lot of those services we're going to have to provide for kids just later on because we'll have to make up for most of those services. So they're going to get that money, but just at a different time and in a different way. So I'm not concerned that if you make an accommodation or if you do something with Warco, that other contractors are going to come knocking on your door saying, what about us? I think you're okay that way. The other concern is the impact on the CARES funding. That's $40,000 that you will be getting sometime either in June. We're not going to plan on using it though until next year. We probably won't do that application until into July. And that one says that the school district must attest that it's been paying all employees and contractors during the closure, or will begin doing so once funding's released, or provide a reasonable explanation in order to be eligible for those funds. No one's exactly sure what a reasonable explanation is. They're saying to the greatest extent practicable. Now, if the money's coming in next year, it's going to be a much, much tighter budget. Could we explain that we're paying as much as we can afford to pay? I think you could next year, but someone's going to have to attest to that fact next year. And we don't know. And I'm always nervous when they don't give us an exact definition of what that means, but that's something to factor in. The other factor is, what about disruptions for next year? Whatever we do now, we have to be careful that it doesn't, either make a bigger issue or compound issues, because there's a chance that next year we might not run the full 175 routes either, because of, if there is a closure in October or November. And this year, maybe we could afford to pay him, but next year we might not be able to afford to pay if we have the option not to. So those are just all things that are in this mix that make it really difficult to make a decision right now, to even make a recommendation to you right now, because we don't have everything that we need to know. But there are a couple things that maybe might be thoughts. What if we could negotiate a lesser rate hike over the remaining 3 years of your contract? That if we make a payment this year, then they would back off of the 3% increase next year and hold their costs steady, because it's going to be a tougher year for the school district next year. And then maybe keep the cost at only 2% years 4 and years 5. That would save the district about $5,371. That would be maybe one thing that we could do. Another, we're looking at the potential of trying to get the elementary kids in for 10 days in August, just to get them as sort of our summer school, but to get them back in and acclimated to school and all of the safety procedures and all of those sorts of things, if it's doable then. And we could upfront pay for those 10 days, knowing that it's only the elementary kids coming in, but I think the cost to the routes are probably going to be the same. So those are a couple of things you could do, but both of those in combination, they would provide Warco the cash flow now that maybe they need. And it would allow us to put money into the pot now that we have, but we might not have in the fall. But it doesn't help Warco in terms of offsetting any lost income. It just is sort of shifting when they would get it. And the other piece, we thought to try to negotiate that route so that even if they come to school and go back downtown and pick up the kids and come back, that's all a part of one route. So that's kind of our thinking at this point. I cannot at this point recommend that we just pay the 18,000, what is that, 18,000? $36, because Warco hasn't given us the information that we need yet, a full disclosure. Like, do they have additional insurance, coming in? We've got some guesstimates about their costs, but we don't know that full piece yet. But if we pay zero, then even though we have a 3-year contract remaining, if we do want to sort of negotiate some give and take about next year, you sort of lose the leverage to do that. And you should expect that if you want them to do something different, it's probably going to be pretty pricey for them to do something different if we don't pay them for some of those routes this year. I guess I'm just interested in sort of getting a read on where you guys are at, what other questions you have, thoughts you have. And at a minimum, I'd need to go back and figure out what else the lawyers would want to make sure we're in any kind of agreement, even if we did want to put something on the table.
Question I have, Nancy. the question I have, Nancy, is, okay, Tom absolutely wants the $18,036. Or at least that's what he's asking for.
Right, and
Has
that's,
he hinted? Go ahead.
he did subtract then what the salary for the drivers that was covered by the PPP.
Okay. And he hasn't got back to you about his other insurance, whether that's kicked in and paid him or not, correct?
Right.
All right. Has he hinted at all as to what he would take out of that number?
No, all I have is what he's put in writing. Yeah.
All right. Well, I agree with you on going forward on years 3 and 4 or 4 and 5 when the remainder of the contract. And if we then, go forward, because they're obviously, after this whole thing is done, they're going to want to renegotiate the contract and take that language out of the contract.
Mhm.
Knowing that if we don't pay something or some of it, that they're going to try to stick it to us in order to make up that money. My question is, my initial thought right off the cuff is, okay, you want the 18,000, but the buses really haven't been, since March, haven't really moved. I understand you still have to pay insurance on them. We haven't had to pay Mitchick Oil for fuel. And you've paid the drivers their necessary route days from that time until, technically when school was to end. My thought is, what if we just paid them in the half the cost of what it is?
Half of the 18.
Yep.
Nancy, I think along with that, we need to remember too is, how are we going to renegotiate the contract if the bus routes are different? And we want to make sure we know what that is before, or do we want to know what that is before we pay, half of the 18 or any of that for that matter?
I think for sure we'd want to make sure that we were clear on what a route would be, that town route would include that. I think that would be a part of that negotiations. Are there other things you're thinking about, Josh?
Well, I'm just, what is a route going to look like? Are we going to still be charged or billed by routes like we are now, or are we going to be billed more by time if, for example, the bus drivers are running more often because we have to get kids here that are, obviously with social distancing spread out? I don't know how that is supposed to work in the DPI's mind or in the state's mind when they send these out, but that right now, that's what it is. So if that's the case, we might be doing either several more routes or because we can't get all the kids on the bus. And if that's the case and we're paying per route, it could get expensive real fast. So, and then if we get shut down in December, for example, for 2 weeks, do we not pay anything? Or I think we got to make sure we have in writing what that's going to look like if we have 2 weeks where we're out again. Are we supposed to pay for those 2 weeks like they're asking us to do now? So I think before we pay anything, do we, a discussion point is, do we need to have that figured out before any money gets paid? And lastly, I know Worco, obviously when we went to Worco, they've been absolutely outstanding for us. They've done a great job. The last thing we want to do is obviously, make relationships between us not so well. However, we need to keep taxpayers' money in mind, to determine what's best for both sides, right? So that's where I'm at.
And so what we're looking for is a discussion with Worco about what's a route going to be. Now, obviously, if they have to take their 3 buses and go back out a second time and pick up kids, at another time during the day, they're going to want to get paid for another route because their expenses are, well, not their bus transportation, but maybe we could ask that question, what would a second route, cost us next year? I'm hoping though that we can avoid that if we can get the elementary kids in the building and then just alternate elementary and high school folks. But if we'd end up having, yeah, that's an issue because how many elementary kids are on the routes? Just the elementary kids on any particular bus ride. We don't know that at this particular point. So
No, we don't know that, and I'm just spit. But I am going to assume that with the COBRA,
and
I
if
have a
we
feeling
could.
that more parents are going to give their students or their kids rides to school.
I'm guessing that could be the
They
case.
have that, probably less than last year.
Yeah, and if families, family members of, siblings in the family could sit in the same seat, and then if we alternated seats. But I think the idea that was thrown out that you have one student per seat and every other seat is an absolutely unmanageable, unmanageable issue. Siblings at least in a seat, and then, but I don't know, if we had to run 2 routes, then that would clearly be an issue. But that's the kind of thing, if we don't do anything right now for Warco, and then we come back in the fall and you
Yeah, I
have,
totally agree. It's going to be an
something
issue
out.
because we can't do that. And
yeah. Then they'll just say, well, a route's a route. So then you'd be having more cost, coming into play. But if you pay half of it now, does that mean we're agreeing in the fall, if there is either a delay at the start of the year or an additional shutdown, are we saying then that we'll pay half of it next year too?
Well, I should say
And
that I don't know. Go ahead.
And we did have the savings of the, not only the gas, but we also saved on field trips, extracurricular runs, because we didn't pay for the buses to go to any baseball or softball games. And we had, of course, a lot of field trips that were in the spring. So it isn't that they didn't have a lot of money that they were anticipating getting from us that they're not getting. It's it's just trying to find that, happy medium where if we spend it, can we justify it by saying, here's the value that the district's receiving. So we're not just paying on a contract just to keep somebody in business, but we're paying on a contract because we're getting additional value. And if part of that is negotiating better circumstances for next year, that's value added to the district. It's just, what do we want to get for that value and how much are we willing to pay for it? So I need obviously to know then more about the insurance and whether they're getting other, relief from certain, from other kinds of arrangements. So I know, and that's what I said in the letter, will you agree to an audit so that we can see what, what's actually happening? Didn't respond to that particular question. But then I think we need to know what kind of flexibility they would have about the routes for next year too. Are they willing to, to do another side loop that's not going to cost us anything more?
How much did we save in field trips, Nancy, by not from March till May?
I think overall we have about, I think it, he says the routes alone were 23,000. So I think I should go back. I think it was about $8,000 is what I had in my head, that we had a savings for transportation if we paid all of the routes, the full 23,000 that he'd wanted. So I think that was about, between extracurricular and field trips. See, we talk about $19,000 for extracurricular transportation. So, and, you know, we did football, volleyball, and basketball, but we didn't do the softball. So, and then if you add the field trips to what we didn't do for the athletics, I think it was around $8,000 of what I had contracted or what I had budgeted for. And then on top of that, there's about 5,000 for fuel that I think was available too.
So in an approximation, then we probably have around $13,000 that we've saved by not just between fuel and extracurricular activities with bus trips.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we, you know, yeah, so there's more savings than, and especially then now that he's taken off the 5,700 that the PPE is paying for the driver's salaries.
And he's saying right now the 18,000 basically is what the remaining are from March till end of school for routes per day,
Mhm.
basically to cover his insurance and his bus payments then.
Bus payments, except then he says that's $11,410. The cost, the payments and the insurance. Then he said the balance is at 6,626. But he's saying that he's anticipating between 5,000 and 5,500 for just summer maintenance on the buses. So whether that's more or less, because they haven't been, you know, driven that much. So that's why he's asking, I think, for the 18,036, because it isn't just the transportation or the payments and insurance that they anticipate they'll be spending most of that on maintenance pieces. So that would be another option, good offer. You know, you could look at just covering the costs of the payments and the insurance, but
Well, that was just a thought that kicked in my head because regardless of whether we had this or not, his regular contract, he'd have to cover the maintenance as part of his contract anyhow. So if we, you know, if it's $11,000 between payments and insurance for the bus, then maybe that's part of what we pay them. But, you know, obviously I'm going to look to see what other people say about that. But then we also wanted to define, you know, what is the route going forward? How is this handled? You know, are we going to be asked each and every time, you know, if there's a 2 or 3 or month, whatever it is that we have to close down again because of this? How is that, you know, are we going to be asked to be paid for that? And imagine he's probably going to tell us yes on everything on that.
and I think to be honest, when we had in the contract and Riverdale, I think or Prairie du Chine's in the same situation. When you said that weather-related cancellations or acts of God, you don't pay unless the route is run. I don't think any of us really anticipated that it would be a full 9 weeks that would be the case. But what would be fair is that 10 days or 15 days of weather-related stuff. And so if that would be something that the district would be comfortable with in future contracts, saying that, you know, weather-related or other cancellations up to 15 days would not be charged to the district. Then you could take a look at, okay, if we pay for those days minus 15 days, we know what's happening this year. And then next year, we know too, if we lost 15 days, that we wouldn't be paying that either. As well as the extracurricular and the, you know, and the field trips that would not be paid. So, I mean, there's something like that you could consider too. But there again, you have to still be able to define what's the value that we're getting.
So I want to weigh in a little bit. 'Cause we're
Sure,
going through
go
the
ahead,
same-
Bryce.
The same thing at Prairie du Chien. In fact, our guys sent a email out to our board just this afternoon and they forwarded it on to me. So there's a couple of things. When Nancy keeps talking about value, what that means is like, we're paying money. Are we getting something back? So what are we getting back? If we could negotiate to get something back, like, we're not going to get as high of increases, or we determine how we're going to do 2 routes. If we do the morning rural kids and then come right back and get the town kids, if we agree to a price on that, that's not a double route or something. But it's just kind of odd to me. It's hard luck they're not getting this business because things are shut down. But why do bus drivers? Why should they get paid? Aren't there other vendors like people that provide school lunches? I guess we're paying the school lunches or the milk, or is there anything that we're going to run into if we paid this that they're going to say you paid the bus drivers for not doing anything? Or do we not pay, carry that money over to next year, and then when they get the money back they charge us for these other routes, I guess, to get the money over time. And a third thing would be, so we have contracts for 2 more years. So we're not going to be required to renegotiate that. We can just keep it the same until, 3 or 4 years down the road when we negotiate the new contracts. And then they'll probably put a clause in there that, I think the DeSoto's clause is something like, they don't make up snow days except there's a minimum of 170 days. You have to pay at least 170 days. So there's some number, just like Nancy's saying that, you can cancel so many days, but then there's a minimum that we get paid. But until that's in there, it seems a little funny if you've been in business and your income goes up and down and you borrow money and you make it through the tough times. That I don't know, unless we can show the value, show what we're getting for paying. And this is kind of like the bus association in Wisconsin and all throughout the United States. It sounds like are rallying for this. Just a little concerned about what other people might say if we pay, unless we get something in return. Or I'm looking for what to tell my board, if you guys can figure that out, what to tell them, because our guy lives right in Prairie du Chien, and he's had kids in school, and I think his wife had worked at school at one time, and so there's a connection there. And it's the same issue when we don't pay him anything. It's a tough negotiation when we need them to change their routes around because of all the accommodations next year. So I see both sides of that.
I agree with Bryce. I just think it's kind of hard to run into a couple farmers or another business that's been closed down for 3 months and explain to those guys when they ask why we just paid for something that we weren't under contract to do. I mean, I can see both sides of it, but if we had a winter where we didn't need any snow plowing, we probably wouldn't be discussing whether we should just send the snowplow guy $5,000 just because we feel bad for him. So yeah, it's just tough to figure out what to do, especially if we don't have some kind of value for what we're paying.
I agree with what you're saying on, on whether we pay or don't pay. And my initial thing was, obviously I didn't want to pay, but going forward after year or 3 and 4, 4 and 5, whatever it is that we have left on our years of contract, going forward and trying to renegotiate with them, right away they're going to stab you for it. And then 2, obviously the number of people in the area that are going to be qualified bus contractors, they're far and few between, only because I think the way, we don't have, we ended it with Russ Stratton at that time. I don't see him coming back. you know, then you got first student and whoever else after that. And we know what we seen the pricing on first student was when we went from Hottenstein to Worco. So it was a pretty significant jump from first student to Worco at that time.
There was one legislator that had put forth a proposed bill that would require school districts to pay all bus contractors. That hasn't gotten significant traction just because every contract is so different across the state. But clearly that's what the Bus Contracting Association wants to see happen. And that did happen in both Illinois and Minnesota. But in both of those cases, the school district receives money based on what they spent. Part of their state aid is based on what they spend on their contracting. So the schools would have lost money from the state. So the state said, no, you just pay them to keep them going, and we'll pay you the state aid that you get for keeping them going. That's not how Wisconsin aid is going though. So Wisconsin aid is based on student count. And for us, then we get under $8,000 in state aid. So we pay that, it doesn't cover even a tenth of the cost of the transportation. So Wisconsin state aid is quite different than, our neighboring states, though they tried to argue that as a reason why you needed to pay this, this contract. So I think the only glitch or the reason, the rationale for making the payment comes back to that $40,000 that we would be getting from the CARES Act. And will there end up being increased interpretation of that says, yes, if you have, you have to have paid your bus contractors or you can't access those funds. And we probably won't know that until, later down the road, because if the explanation that we provide in July or August, says that we didn't pay our full bus contract and gives the reasons of budget hardship or other kinds of rationale, for why we didn't do it. If somebody says that's not good enough, and then they come back and say, you can't get your CARES money unless you, and I think the language there was, or let's see, or will begin doing so once funding is released. So does that mean, Bryce, I'm looking at you on this one, does that mean that if we don't pay it and our explanation to the CARES Act police isn't accepted, then we'd have to come back and attest to the fact that we'll start paying our contractor. And that would just mean just that next year we'd have to pay for the full contract, but we didn't have the CARES Act money, so we couldn't afford, so we didn't pay it last year. Do you interpret it that way, Bryce?
I don't have enough information. I haven't read enough on it, but I know we're not going to get until next budget year. But if we can justify why we aren't paying, but to be consistent, I think Brent had a good example of this, in a bad year of snow removal. And then today we talked, like, we didn't pay the spring officials. Those individuals lost their fees for that. So either we pay everybody or don't pay, or pay for services that we receive, is kind of how I think about it. The other thing to keep in mind that is a little scary, we don't know what other new costs we're going to have next year. Let's say this thing gets worse and we have to continue with all kinds of modifications, or we don't have metal detectors, but we have these scanners that we have to purchase, or I don't know where it's going to go and how many masks we have to buy and gowns. So we have unknown expenses that we don't know about, but we are getting asked to pay for services we did not receive, so this company can stay whole. And maybe that's a good enough reason that, you want to have a bus company around, you want to have a good relationship, and there aren't many choices, and maybe that's the value. I mean, maybe you can make an argument for that. It would be easier if they forced us and made a decision, but they're not. They probably won't. Well, Josh talked about, do we do some negotiations of what it might look like if we paid something at all? Would they lock in what these extra routes might be if we have to run 2 routes a day, or maybe get some give and take. Like back when you negotiated stuff, you had, what was that, Nancy? You had both sides had proposals, and then you struck the things down and you got to a final thing you agreed on. Maybe you have to negotiate. We get something if we pay you, and what would that be?
There.
But we have to answer to our small business owners in the district that when the corn price goes down, they lose money, and then sometimes they make money, but sometimes they lose. So I'm concerned about that also.
I think, does it not come down to going back to what we said is called value?
Called what?
And I think we all can agree on to lose called value, and we can agree that Warco has done a great job for us. So what do we need, or what would be, a negotiation point for us where we could keep Warco, in business and moving forward, but yet we can find value in the price that we pay them, so our taxpayers are getting something for what we pay. To me, that's the key of what we need to figure out.
Well, I get that, obviously everybody wants to be whole and not have to be losing money out of the deal, but everybody's lost something out of it. And obviously he's losing something out of it, but he doesn't want to go too far in the hole where he has to, pay or borrow more money than what he thinks it's really worth. To me, that's a fact of life right now, what everybody's having to do. So, it's Brent made the, prime example. You gotta, snows one day and they're expecting 25 days of snow that they have to push snow. And you only pay him for one, and he's not coming back to ask us for additional money on it. There's also the fact that what Josh noted too is that, going forward for next school year, are we going to have two routes morning and night just to make sure that the kids get home safely without having to, and what's that going to look like? I guess they're going to have to come up with, we're probably going to have to look at a somewhat of a sit down meeting with Tom and his team and say, we're going to have to, in order for us to proceed with something like this and know that we're going to get value out of it, some type of value out of it, we got to have something that from our side that shows you're making an effort, and other than just collecting $18,000 just to make you whole.
And I've chosen so far not to have that conversation with Tom because I wanted to get a sense from you guys about, is it a no-go at all? Or is there some wiggle room? And what are the things that you'd like to put on the table that might be considered of value for you guys? And I think we also need to make sure that we know, does he have, loss of work, work interruption insurance, that he's getting some money from other places? Are there other relief packages that he's been able to access, in addition to PPP? So I think we need to hear about those things too.
Well, I think you're right, Nancy. I think Tom, Warco's got to come through and say, okay, do you have some type of work relief insurance that says, if school shuts down now for the next six months, do you have an insurance policy that covers what you have for costs? If he does, then great. But I don't know if he does or not, and he hasn't answered that question. But then we're in what year with our current contract? We're in year 3?
The contract runs through fiscal year 23. So you've got 2021, 21, 22, and 22, 23. So you've got 3 years yet in your contract.
Of the remaining contract.
Right.
Okay. And they haven't talked about yet about trying to renegotiate out further yet, have they?
No, they have not raised that question. Though there again, like I say, would it be of value to the district to extend that in this discussion to 5 years? If you could keep, and like, I don't think it, because next year's budget is going to be the hardest one for the district too. So if there could be a no increase in transportation for next year, that might be, so we'd in essence sort of be paying now for next year's increase that they're going to charge us for, or, that could be a way of looking at it. They're getting the money now that they want to have an increases in the next 3 years. And the board's just saying, well, we'll pay it now, and you just won't charge us quite as much over the next 3 years. That would be one way of getting value for, for the contract. Warco might not look at it that way, but it might help them if they are in a, if they're looking for some additional cash right now.
Does the contract read right now it's a 2% increase each year?
It reads a 3% for next year, 2.75 in the 4th year, and 2.5 in the 5th year. So
Okay.
what I put down there at 5,300 savings would be if we went next year with nothing, and then a 2% to 2% increase in the last 2 years.
All right.
And I like I say, I haven't put anything on the table because I didn't know if you guys were open to negotiating at all.
Well, Brent and Andy, what are your thoughts on dealing with this?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Like I said before, I do think we would want to get some value of it. And I just happened to run it by 2 different people that are business owners, and they both looked at me like I was crazy when I said maybe we're thinking about coming up with a way to pay them something. And like I said, when you're in a small community like this with farmers and small business owners that have been really struggling here the last few months, it's kind of hard to do that. If we could get a contract extension, but I doubt Warco is going to want to do that, because if once we tap into that contract, they're going to want to have wording changed for situations like this. So even if they wanted to extend it, I'm pretty sure all bus contracts are going to have something, for this type of situation in the future.
Oh, most definitely.
So we might be better off just to sit on the contract we have.
Andy, your thought?
I don't know. I'm always thinking about relationships, and that if we don't do anything, I think that in the years to come, we're going to have issues with them. And I'd rather negotiate something, kind of getting what Nancy and Josh and Bryce talked about, getting some things that they need, and then paying them something.
I definitely want to have something locked down for, in the fall, if we do need to run extra routes or something like that.
For sure.
Wouldn't just say, okay, here, we're going to give them half or something like that, just because we're nice guys. We need to have something figured out.
Right. I think if we propose whatever dollar amount we do propose, I think you got to have what you're saying, what everybody's saying is you have to have some value in return, whether it's next year or the next 2 years from it. Because obviously, as it states right now, we don't have to do anything.
Right.
And Tom knows that. We don't have to do anything.
Except he keeps raising the CARES Act as that, that 40,000. But I'd like to do a little more research into that too, because that's just coming out and we're still not, we're not getting very clear expectations on that. And if it is such that the 40,000, that you don't have to, you didn't have to meet all of the contract language this year, but as you agree to start paying your contractors once you get the grant. Well, if we don't get the grant until next year, then we could just say, well, next year's contract, we're going to have to meet in full because we took the CARES money. But the money that you have from this year, you know, would just be the money that you have from this year, however else you'd like to use that. So if I was fairly confident that that would be the case, I'm just reluctant to put money at the end of June 30th into the fund balance earmarked for potential transportation costs in case we have to pay something to Worco, because then how do you argue that you don't have the money to pay them if you put money in fund balance to do that? So I don't want to do that. I'd like to expend as much as we can of this year's budget. But if we had to use that flow through or that CARES money to pay the contract in full next year, then you know, you would just do that. But the contract money, the budget money would still be in the budget. If I was fairly confident that you wouldn't have to worry about this year, but you could still get the CARES money as long as you meet your full contract obligation next year, then at least next year you would know that that contract language won't matter because the CARES Act is overriding our contract language. And that's your explanation to taxpayers that are concerned, is that, well, you know, in order to not pay them, we would have had to have given up $40,000 in federal relief money. That's an explanation people will say, oh, I guess I understand that, you know, but just to do it without having that requirement in place, it's a little harder to do that. So, and I can do some sort of fishing. This has helped me get a little better sense of sort of, you know, where we're at. But if I could, you know, at least ask them about what other things, what other insurance maybe they have, and that we're looking at trying to take a look at what would happen if we had to run extra routes next year, and just say, could you just give me some information on that? I wouldn't say we're trading or we're negotiating or anything like that. I'd just say, can you give us, can we talk about what that might look like? That might give me a better sense of what's happening, but I'm not sure that we'd have the ability. I mean, running 2 routes a day just seems to be a really difficult kind of thing, you know, to do, but that's hard to figure out how to get kids to school safely if they're all in a bus. So.
Right.
We're a pretty tiny district with only 3 routes. I mean, we gotta look at what other bigger districts are gonna do. You know, for us, it's, you know, run a couple routes, but imagine that for a district like Prairie du Chien or River Valley or somewhere, it's
Right.
probably not doable. So.
Right. And with the original planning that we're trying to do, we're still hoping to spread our elementary kids out so that they can socially distance in classrooms and around the building, and just not have the high school and middle school there every day. So if that's the case, then we could probably just run the 1 route a day. And like high school kids, well, not too many of those kids end up riding the bus, you know, necessarily anyway. So my bigger concern is that I didn't want to make someone just really, you know, upset with the district, and then all of a sudden getting a $30 per route surcharge on that extra run from just downtown back up to the school district, or having them count that as another route to try to make up some of those dollars. So because that's a pretty easy adjustment for us to make, is just to bring the country kids in and then go back downtown and pick up the town kids. That's the easiest way for us to spread out the number of kids that we have on the buses. So hopefully that would work. So.
Yeah, I think we're gonna have to go fishing on this a little bit, Nancy. I don't know how else to get, you know, from point A to point B without
Yeah.
throwing it in the water and seeing where he kind of takes us and leads us to, and then try to pull it back in and see what we can do with it. But that's the only thing I can think of.
Yeah, well, and but at least I have a little better sense now of what some of those potential issues are, and that there'd at least be some willingness to discuss some things if indeed we're getting value. And I didn't want to have that conversation with them. And if you guys were all of the view that we've got a contract, it says we don't have to pay, that's where we're going to stand. I didn't want to open that door, but if there is some flexibility, like I say, I can at least do some fishing. And I'm thinking at this point, I did ask that we scheduled that other, hang on to that, the second board meeting, potentially the end of June. What we'd want to, because by June 30th, we're going to have to know, whether we're comfortable paying them something or not, because then that will impact the decisions we make at the end of the fiscal year a little bit too. So it doesn't have to be done by June 10th, but I will do my best to try to come up with, some additional information. And then if we can get back together again and have that, or if it makes sense, if it sounds like it would be good to bring Tom to the table and have this discussion, are you guys open to having him be at the next meeting to talk about some things? If it looks like we could have some, if it would be good for you to hear from him too.
I think it would be, but I think first I want to, if you can go back to him and say, this is, the things we're looking at. And if he comes back and provides, obviously, if he has the insurance that we've talked about and, that what's the route going to look like for next year based on what we're currently seeing right now. And then, some other value things like you've talked about here as far as, increases and, maybe just holding it steady as it is right now, then, if he's open to those things, then maybe, yeah, then we bring him in and talk about those things.
Okay, all righty. Well, that seems to be probably, Josh, was there something that we're missing?
I don't think so. I think the biggest thing is when we talk to Tom and just obviously let him know what the situation is on our end. And I'm sure he's probably aware of what people have to be thinking. We have to pay attention to what, again, taxpayers want to see value for the money that their tax dollars go to. I'm sure he needs to understand that. And I can't believe Tom wouldn't be honest with us too, as far as what insurance money that he would have coming to him. I'm just curious to see what other schools are thinking as well that, Warco has contracted for, Platteville, Iowa Grant, and Bloomington, or not Bloomington, but River Ridge. So.
Yeah.
Well, didn't Iowa Grant pay theirs?
And because Iowa Grant, I think their contract was silent on that issue, though. I don't think they had any, I think they'd contracted for X number of days. So I'm not sure that Platteville or River Ridge have that language that we have in ours, that we don't pay if they don't run. A lot of the contracts don't. So, but I will find that out. And then I'll find out what those districts are doing as well. And we'll find out if they've negotiated anything else. And again, I haven't tried to be, too diggy on those pieces until I had a little read from you, but I will find out that too. And we'll see what the other schools contract with Warco have done. Because I've asked for that too, and I haven't gotten that, that was in my first request to Warco. Can you tell me what other school districts are doing? And I haven't heard back, but I can find that out.
I'm almost positive Iowa Grant, whatever the contract says, I know they did a payment to Warco.
Okay.
Because I think I'm almost positive I remember seeing that in the Dodgeville Chronicle.
Okay. Well, any other thoughts about things of value? We've looked at reduced rates. We've looked at, defining a route.
Outside of that, Nancy, I don't know what else I could really think of besides, you pretty much hit,
And again, their value for us, they're not necessarily value for Warco, but if they're concerned about cash flow now, it is a way to sort of spread some of that out over this year and next year. So,
right.
okay. Well, let me do a little fishing and a little digging. And Josh and I can set up a Zoom with Warco and then sort of talk through some things once we've gotten a little more information. And then we can come back and see where we're at. I'm not sure that we'll have that done before the board meeting, but we would have the rest of the month though to try to keep meeting if negotiations looks like it would be the best path. But Bryce, was there anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, well, I was just thinking, anything for value, would it be value to go beyond, go years 4 and 5? If you paid them something and it went years 4 and, the contract isn't negotiated yet, 4 and 5 years out, if they would have a increase of between 2 and 3%. So we know for the next 5 years that we're not going to pay over 3% on transportation increases. It's kind of like health insurance when you get not to exceed rates or something. That's really nice for budgeting. I don't know if they would do that. That's pretty far down the road though. 4 years out and 5 years out, a couple of years to have 2.7% increase or something like that, not to exceed.
Mhm.
That's the only thing I can think of.
Okay. Well, and since we paid for the fuel oil, that's the most volatile cost that sometimes it's hard to predict. But I don't know what the impact of all of this is going to have on the cost of a new bus,
Sure.
I don't know. So if they, if they're trying to recycle a bus through, I don't know what the cost will mean for, for that, but we can ask them. It's their business. They should know. But I also know that they have a pretty hefty lobby behind them that's giving them, information and encouragement and the expectation that they're driving to get fully paid for everything. And they're one of the few small businesses around that have that kind of lobby power behind them. And so we're seeing that too. So.
Okay.
Doesn't add value to us, adds value to them, but not
But
to
it's just that
not to
more of a
us.
one-way thing than it is two ways. So
Right, okay. Well, I will do some more research around the CARES Act. I will check on what the other schools have done. And then Josh and I will do a Zoom with Warco and see if we can gather some more information about the degree of their flexibility, maybe the degree of their concern about their, viability or what's going on, and see if we can put together a few things that are of value for us for next year. And then we'll just get back together once we have some more information. Does that sound like a plan?
sounds good.
Can we also add, Ms. Henriksen, like Kenny was saying, if we could find out what Ridge is doing and what, is it Platteville and Iowa Grant?
Yes, right. We'll do that.
Did you mention that already? I apologize if you did.
Yep.
I keep cutting out in and out here, so I just want
Yep.
to make sure that was in there. But
Yep, no, I can try to get that done, yet even tonight, just send out an email quick and ask if they've made a decision on that, so.
Okay.
And Prairie du Chien is not going to pay their contract. Is that what they've decided? It's still in
Well,
limbo.
that's what we decided, but we are, he's asking again, and he must have heard, we got quite a bit of CARES Act money. We're a higher poverty district, so we got quite a bit more money than you guys did. So that's probably the timeliness of the letter to the board. But he's going to have to show us how we can, face our taxpayers if we need to pay something or agree to pay. What's our rationale that we paid him and not anybody else?
Okay.
Prairie's a little different. We didn't pay spring coaches. We didn't pay anybody that didn't work. They took a harder line like that. We paid track coaches 2 weeks and baseball and softball 1 week because track season had a week of practice, but we didn't pay a bunch of contracts for advisors. Kind of, if you worked, you got paid. If you didn't work, you didn't get paid. So our own people didn't get paid. And then the bus the bus driving thing, it's like, it was an easy way to say no at the time, but he's not gonna go away either. And I think what Nancy's saying is true. It's like a lobby group. It's almost like a union or a lobby group, the Association of Bus Drivers in the state and in the nation. It's,
Could you send me, Bryce, the email that you received with that legal opinion? I just, the more I
Sure.
understand the arguments they're making, the easier it is for me to track down, what the other side is. So if you could send, I'd just be curious about what arguments they're continuing to make. But
okay,
they're making arguments from other states, though, that don't necessarily apply to Wisconsin. So, but I'd love to read it.
right. Okay,
All righty. Well, I
Right.
appreciate everybody's input. That's been helpful. And sorry that we have to do this incrementally, but sometimes that's the only way to go. Just kind of work through it and then we'll come back and we'll see where we go next step, okay?
All right, so we have to
Sounds
do
good.
a meeting adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
All right, motion passes, so we're adjourned.
Okay, thank you very much, guys.
Everybody have a good
Bye-bye.
night.
See you next week.
Yep.
We're still on public taping, so I will just check in with you tomorrow, Josh, about maybe a time, when we can try to get a hold of him, because I'm sure that Tom will be in touch with me right away, wanting to know if any decision was made, so. Can you unmute, Josh?
That's a tough one. I can see our side, obviously, but I see their side. And last thing we want is not to have them be a successful business that does a great job for us as they've done in the past, right? So,
Mhm.
and obviously they didn't plan for this either.
Right.
However, we had in our contract what we had in our contract for a reason.
Right, right. But
So-
but like I say, I don't know that anybody really, what you don't want to pay for are those, because if you have a really bad winter and you have, like we did that 9-10 snow days that year, you're paying for a lot of snow plowing and you're paying high heat bills and all the rest of it. So not paying for the bus driver offsets some of those other costs, but nobody really, I think, ever expected that we'd be shut down for a whole 9-week period.
Yeah.
So, if we could look at, let's cap that at 15 days, that's still 3 weeks of driving time. So hopefully, we wouldn't be in a situation where we'd need more than that, but next year could be another situation. So that's the other part is, but if the CARES Act requires us to pay for it, then we'd be paying them in full next year because the CARES Act required it. So then do we want to pay them this year when it's not required? If
Right.
we're to pay them even beyond that next year. So,
Yeah, and then like the others, I mean, Kenny said we don't want them to stick it to us. And I'm not saying, I don't think Tom would ever do that. However,
Yeah.
we do need to negotiate if school gets shut down for 2-week increments.
Yeah.
This fall and next school year, right? If we're not paying that could get ugly. Obviously, paying now might save us later.
right. Or if they're getting PPP now to cover things, but they're not getting anything next year, we want to make sure that we don't pay now when next year maybe they'll need it even more. And, so it's a real complicated mess, but it will be what it will be. So, I have some stuff to check on, but I will email out to those superintendents and see if I can find out, what the status of what they decided and why they decided it. And if they made any, any adjustments to their contract in order to make that payment. And I'll see what we find out.
Sounds good.
And I'm hoping maybe tomorrow I might find out a little more about the CARES Act and that in my 10 o'clock meeting with WASDA.
Yeah,
If not, then I can get back to Eileen and see what she's finding out too, instead of go from there. So,
sounds good.
all righty. Well, thanks a lot. This is always helpful.
Yep. Alrighty.
See you
I'll
tomorrow.
let Brad know the meeting's over, so
Thank you very much. You bet. Bye-bye.
have a good night.
Thanks.